Okay. Okay. So the fourth paper for today is entitled The Case of the Franciscan Diaspora from Post-War Intramuros, Narratives of Departure, Settlements, and Continuities. So this is written by Jason de la Cruz. Jason de la Cruz is a fourth-year sociology undergraduate at the University of Santo Tomas and a research and project assistant at the UST Research Center for Social Sciences and Education for the National Catechetical Study 2016-2021, Pastoral Action Research and Intervention Project. Recently, this year, he had internship engagement with the Center for Intramuros Studies under the Intramuros administration. He's also taking his formation towards candidacy to the secular Franciscan order. His research work and interests revolve around the sociology of Catholicism and pastoral issues, catechetical ministry, local church history, Franciscan Capuchin history, Catholic studies, archival research, and secondary data analysis. The panel of reactors for this paper are Mr. Rancho Arcilla and Mr. Nico J. Ramos. Rancho Arcilla holds the following position under the Intramuros administration: Senior Tourism Operations Officer, Chairperson of the Intramuros Technical Committee on Architectural Standards, and Head of the Archives and Central Record Section. As TICA's chairperson, Mr. Arcilla oversees the review of all development, including new constructions in the walled city. He is also a PhD student at the Tri-College of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has an MA in Philippine Studies from UP Diliman. Mr. Nico J.B. Ramos is a social science subject teacher at the Ateneo de Manila Senior High School. He finished his BA History from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Manila, and is currently pursuing MA in History at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Currently, he is working on the history of physical disabilities in the Spanish Philippines. So, without further ado, I'll turn over the floor to Jason. Jason?
Good afternoon to everyone. Pakset po nung. I hope I am heard. It is an honor to be here virtually to present my paper entitled The Case of the Franciscan Diaspora from Post-War Intramuros, Narratives of Departure, Settlements, and Continuities, which is the fruit of my internship engagement with the Center for Intramuros Studies just this year. I am Jason, currently a sociology student at UST. Just last October, I presented this but privately instead of the usual format. In fact, some of the interns who presented before me today were also there when I presented this at the end of my official internship period. And so I find it interesting how parts and pieces of our argumentation intersect and point at the same realities which I will present or have previously presented. To start off, what this paper argues is that using the case of the Franciscan family, there is what we call a diaspora period of Intramuros' post-war years, which is characterized by departures, settlements, and continuities in extramuros. Thus, such period provides a foundational context to contemporary Intramuros studies. The concept of intramuros studies has always been out there, but of course it is now more institutionally articulated in what is now the Center for Intramuros Studies. Intramuros studies, as a branch of historical knowledge, is encompassed by diverse fields which collectively examine its different facets. For the past decades, and especially with the Center for Intramuros Studies, historical parameters for these research endeavors are usually marked during Spanish colonial, World War II, restoration, conservation. Interestingly, discussions on the post-war dimension of Intramuros remains deficient, even as a research gap in previous publications of the IA. Drawing from my sociological upbringing, or rather disposition, I quote what Peter Berger perennially says as the first wisdom of sociology, that things are not what they seem. And so therefore, we must continuously revisit and rethink what was and what is Intramuros. It is from this disposition that I came to look at what was the post-war Intramuros. Indeed, World War II has affected unforeseen drastic change to Intramuros, immensely surpassing the extent of previous attempts of its destruction and conquer. It has served a fatal blow, therefore, to its residents, especially that it is the political and spiritual center of the archipelago. This happened during the post-war period of Intramuros, that it was abandoned. While this is usually construed as an elusive time in contemporary discourses, it is predominantly characterized as blighted, abandoned, ruined, and reconfigured, such as the context dealt with by the IA in its foundation when the restoration efforts were initiated. Thus, the exploration of the post-war period has the power to produce contextual insight to the reconstructed contemporary Intramuros of the 21st century. To facilitate this exploration, the paper utilizes narratives of former Intramuros residents under the Franciscan family, namely Order Friars Minor, Order Friars Minor Capuchin, Order of St. Clare, and Secular Franciscan Order, which was known at the time as the Venerable Third Order. This paper mainly employs archival research in select locations to generate historical narratives, which collectively is what we call as the Franciscan diaspora. Now, in these locations of archival research, including, of course, the Intramuros Administration Archives, and also by correspondence to archives in Spain. Now, firstly, we go to the Order of Friars Minor. Along with most of Intramuros, San Francisco Church and Convent was also destroyed. 11 of the friars died, while the others sought refuge to the convent of Santa Ana de Manila, one of the two surviving OFM administered parishes after the war, the other being San Francisco del Monte. In fact, in Santa Ana did the friar survivors and the officials of the order reside since the loss of Intramuros. In fact, Father Eusebio Garcia del Alamo writes that this temporary stay in Santa Ana was the continuation of the curial activities in Intramuros. To head the curia, Father Miguel Rodeño OFM assumed the roles of commissary ad nutum delegati by March 1945, since his predecessor was among the casualties. Both the OFM friars and the poor clerks were making solicitations for their needs, especially like materials for habits. One way through which the OFM friars were partially alleviated in their economic challenges was through reparation payments, which came from two entities, the American Army and the Philippine War Damage Commission. Now, in 1946, the OFM friars received a reparation payment of 3,858 pesos from the American Army for using San Francisco Church as a place for battle. 2 years later, in February 1948, the friars submitted a claim to the War Damage Commission, and they proposed 975,000 pesos, but they only got 401,727.68 pesos. Now, the OFM friars intended for San Francisco Church to be rebuilt outside Intramuros, like the intent of many religious orders at the time. This was realized when the Ayala family offered them a parcel of land in their Hacienda de San Pedro de Makati, a section of which is called Forbes Park. The Ayalas have previously thought of developing this land even before the war by building a church. Such thought was further pushed by the destruction of Manila, thus seeking a development of this potential residential property. When the Ayalas knew that the order was looking for land on which to rebuild San Francisco Church, they offered the land. There, the order established the Santuario de San Antonio, drawn from the cultivated Antonine devotion in Intramuros. Thus, despite the physical church ruin, the San Francisco Church continued, albeit assuming a new titular. A note declaration in the initial page of the Crónica del Convento de San Antonio de los Españoles affirms this, what we could see here. Further, this association with the former Church of Intramuros was accentuated when the statue of St. Anthony in the Intramuros patio was transferred beside the Santuario. In 1951, Father Gabino Gallego and Father Eusebio Garcia del Alamo, the provincial minister and provincial delegate respectively, and Mr. Jose R. McMicking, apologies. Allow me to share my screen. Pardon. There. So again, going back in 1951, the Franciscan Order and the Ayala y Compañía entered into an agreement to construct a colonial-style church and convent on an approximately 20,000 hectare land, building on it as well a private chapel and cemetery exclusive for the Ayala family. An authorization to sell their lot was given through a rescript from the sacred. Sorry, or just tell me if pardon for the technical difficulties. Uh, just allow me to reshare my screen. Thank you. So going back, the Franciscan order was authorized to sell their lot uh, in 1951, 1 August 1951. Thus, on 4 September 1951, the La Corporación Franciscana and the Mapua Institute of Technology, represented by Don Tomas Mapua, entered in an agreement for this sale, indicated at 750,000 pesos with a down payment and annual interest. So, in total, the amount collected was 800,000 pesos and was mostly spent on constructing Santuario de San Antonio. Now, up until today, of course, Mapua occupies the space. Now, because the Franciscans already have Santuario de San Antonio as the continuation of San Francisco Church, the Curia was also transferred there. In fact, even before the church was, say, fully inaugurated, the order already got the authorization to transfer, quote, the residence and Church of San Francisco de Manila from Intramuros to Forbes Park. They got the authorization on 6 February 1952. And so, for a time, the Curia was located in Santuario de San Antonio. But then it was transferred in 1970, during the time of Father Silvestre Murillo, OFM, to some offices at least, to Sampaloc. But then again, in 1979, it was transferred to what is now, here is the picture of the demolition of San Francisco Church in a magazine dated 1950 in the Intramuros Administration Archives. So here's what we now know as the OFM Provincial House, which is before the Colegio Serafico, the building of the Colegio Serafico. It was transferred, the Curia was transferred there in 1979 upon the decision of the Vicarial Chapter. And up until now, it is still the location of the Curia. And perhaps it is because of the association of the Curia with the church that it's adjunct church, the minor Basilica of San Pedro Bautista, now takes more central roles in the order. Now, we proceed with the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin. The Capuchin friar, you see, so we go back to 1945. You see, the Capuchin friars had already prepared for the impending destruction. So they were already able to dispose of their belongings. And so, of course, you know already what happened. Now, who took charge was Father Benito de Ardesa, who was now the ipso facto head of the Capuchins. And so when he returned to Intramuros on March 3, 1945, he was able to see Intramuros, and then later on, a few days after, they were able to dig some buried niches of the friars, and also to get the images of Our Lady from Intramuros. Now, like the Franciscans and like the other orders at the time, they applied to receive reparation payment from the War Damage Commission. A bulletin dated July 1946 indicated that Father Benvenido made a declaration stating that the damages and loss incurred by the Capuchins in Intramuros were estimated at 327,900 pesos, excluding the amount of money stolen from them. However, what was granted was only 85,000 pesos. Now, of course, the convent in Intramuros was destroyed. So immediately after the war, Santa Teresita Convent, here on the one with the cross, Santa Teresita Convent, facing Canlaon Street, became the order's provisional mother house in the Custoses ad hoc residence. It was the most reasonable settlement because it had clear access to Intramuros and other significant institutions. Because of this new purpose, it was renovated and then inaugurated in 1946. Now, although devotion to the Virgin of Lourdes continued in Santa Teresita, the Capuchins still wanted to rebuild their church in Intramuros. However, because of economic and human resource difficulties, they were not able to do that. But they really wanted, and they already had the plans drafted for that. Because they what they wanted to do now was to build on previously donated lot by the by the Araneta Tuazon family, an 8,000 square meter land in Santa Mesa Heights, which was donated way back in the early 1940s, even before the war. Now, to build this, fortunately, by 1948, through the efforts of the Archconfraternity of Our Lady of Lourdes, a relatively successful fundraising campaign was made, adding to the war damage claim that they had, which they used as construction fund mainly. In fact, it still continued even while the reconstruction was ongoing, the fundraising campaign. Assigned to the task of the fundraising was Father Fernando de Erasun, OFM CAP, who made house-to-house solicitations and family visits and welcomed donations of whatever quantity. The permission for its commencement was given by the Archbishop in September 1949. On 29 January 1950, Bishop Miguel Angel Olano, OFM CAP, presided over the blessing and imposition of the cornerstone. And in that attendance, of course, were the donors and the mayor, representing, of course, the city. By the last quarter of 1950, it was mostly finished. And so by 1951, the eve of the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, the venerated image was already transferred there. Now, a little over a month after that, the custos transferred from Santa Teresita, which was the provisional mother house, to Lourdes Convent. Now, that transfer of the custos marked another transfer of the Capuchin Curia. Now, on August 15, 1951, Archbishop Reyes finally dedicated this church. Eventually, it was decided to transfer the Curia again from Lourdes Church to Santa Teresita because of the increasing parochial roles of Lourdes Church. So the transfer was made and decided upon in 1982. But then again, it was a curial extension was made in Bahay Capanata according to Father Truade de los Santos. And later on, it was decided to really have a separate lot to establish the provincial house, which is here, the Bahay Capuchino, along 50 Apo Street. Up until now, it is where the provincial minister lives and some of the offices of the order are located. Now we proceed with the Order of St. Clare. It was only on 4 recorded occasions that the Poor Clares left the monasterio: the British occupation, the Philippine Revolution, the advent of the Japanese occupation, the liberation of Manila. It's the liberation of Manila that their leaving of Intramuros became permanent. So most of the destruction of the monasterio came on 22 to 23 February 1945. They were split into 3 groups. Father Hierro, and the first group was Father Hierro and Sor Concordia de San Francisco. If you saw the poster in Facebook, that was the photo of Father Hierro and Sor Concordia. They were split into 3 groups. They were the story of their evacuation was that they were immediately reached by the Americans. They evacuated to Binondo and then transferred to Sampaloc, where they were accommodated by the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary. Now, also other nuns were located, the other group of nuns were located in Welfareville, Mandaluyong, and another group was located, I think, in San Lazaro Hospital at the time. Now, we don't have any photos of their stay in Sampaloc, but we could see here in 2 letters from the archives. You see Real Monasterio de Santa Clara de Manila, St. Anthony's Girls Institution. And then later on, a few months after they stayed there in Sampaloc, they transferred in the Colegio Serafico building, now the OFM Provincial House, as their temporary monasterio, as invited by the friars. We could see also that there, Monasterio de Santa Clara. So it means that regardless of the building, they kept the monastery with them. Now, a few days after the war, going back, a few days after the war, the nuns were able to, a few moments after the war, rather, the nuns were able to after they settled in Sampaloc, in Quezon City, they were able to to gather their belongings little by little from Intramuros what they left, and the most precious that they got were the relics of Venerable Jeronimo de la Asunción, which they are still keeping up until now. Now, while they were staying in the Colegio Serafico in San Francisco del Monte, they were able to still have some sense of resignation to the divine will. They were making requests for items such as braveries and irons for communion wafers, and their financial predicament remained. And their following the rule of life became more difficult because they had to live rather in cells in bunker beds. So by the end of the 1940s, they received a more than 2-hectare land donation along Aurora Boulevard. And so they built a monastery there. The OFM friars loaned an amount to them using the war damage commission that the friars got. And so in 1950, they transferred to that monastery in Aurora Boulevard. But in 1995, that monastery was demolished because it was going to be constructed over by the C5 flyover, and it was a new monastery was constructed in considerable distance away from the original place, and this is what the monastery is right now. Then the last one is the secular Franciscan order. So as a foundational context, the Philippines before had two major centers for the Venerable Third Order, the VOT de Intramuros, mostly for the Spanish elite, and then the VOT de Sampaloc for the common folk. During the American era, however, the Intramuros fraternity opened its doors across socioeconomic profiles, provided that the same spiritual dispositional requirements are met. This caused a significant rise of secular Franciscans in the VOT de Intramuros. However, still because of the mass inclusivity of the VOT de Sampaloc, it became the de facto center of the order and of all the fraternities in the country. Indeed, then it was a fatal blow when the order lost these two central churches during the liberation of Manila. Just like its adjunct San Francisco Church, the VOT Chapel was reduced to rubble, so perhaps did some of its members become more casualties. Interestingly, as a result of the war, the fraternity of the VOT de Intramuros did not cease to exist. Rather, it was joined to the VOT de Sampaloc. Plans for the merger of these two fraternities were already being discussed in 1945 after the war. So on 27 January 1946, the two fraternities met in the same convent of the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary in Sampaloc, where the Four Clares stayed, to discuss the direction of both groups. In a unanimous agreement signed by the two ministers, the merger of the two fraternities was raised to the provincial commissary. So since it was decided to no longer build the VOT de Intramuros Chapel, efforts centered on the rebuilding of VOT de Sampaloc, which was dedicated to Our Lady of the Pilgrim. So immediately after the war, Father Rodeño prioritized this for the pastoral care of the parishioners and the secular Franciscans. Now, in order to realize these plans, Father Mariano deemed it necessary for the church to gain popularity by gathering devotees who could support the project. This he did by reviving the strong Antonine devotion left at Intramuros. This was before the construction of Santuario de San Antonio. So the Franciscans were able to build a makeshift church in his honor out of light materials at first. Father Montero brought an image from Santa Ana for use in Sampaloc, but later on, a replica of the San Antonio de Intramuros was destroyed, which was destroyed during the war. Sorry, I think I wasn't clear. Later on, a replica of the San Antonio de Intramuros was made since the original San Antonio de Intramuros was destroyed during the war. So it was already finished by 1946, and so it was already used during the fiesta. Sorry for the. Yeah. Thank you. Now, so it was already finished by 1946, May 1946, and so it was made already there by Fiesta. And it is the same image that is up until now in the central niche of the church. Eventually, in the building of the church, eventually financial support came because of the growing devotion to St. Anthony. And OFM friars donated 50,000 pesos to construct a convent beside the church. Now, donations were not only the source of finances for the construction of the church, because the VOTD Manila and the VOTD Sampaloc also got financial compensation from the War Damage Commission. It has paid the VOTD Sampaloc a total of 24,289.28, while the VOTD Manila was paid 49,874.35. So because of the merger, the payments were transferred to that of Sampaloc for the reconstruction. So although these were received from 1949 to 1950, the VOTD Sampaloc was already open for public worship when it celebrated the Feast of St. Anthony in June 1946, as I said earlier, already having the Intramuros replica image of San Antonio de Sampaloc, now San Antonio de Sampaloc, but it was a replica of San Antonio de Intramuros. The church was already regularly used a month later. By late 1947, the Archbishop dedicated the finished church residence to St. Anthony. Now, using the narratives of the Franciscan family, it can be said that the post-war years of Intramuros, here is the matrix of Franciscan institutions, their descendant locations as discussed earlier. Using the narratives of the Franciscan family, it can be said that the post-war years of Intramuros, that is after the liberation of Manila up until the official restoration period, can be called as the diaspora period. Here, the Franciscan diaspora, right? And we have the diaspora period. A diaspora being characterized as departure, settlement, and continuity. A common ground among the narratives is a desperation for the condition of Intramuros from 1945 to 1951. From reasonable shock to pragmatic measures, the influence of popular thought on Intramuros was strong such that they were able to penetrate the decisions of the order and by extension the continuities of their institutions outside Intramuros. This placement of Intramuros in the post-war Philippine public sphere, which opined it as full of ruins, inutile land, residing with a domicile and of low land value, moved the order to consider practical steps in adapting to economic challenges, as moving forward after the war was no option. Based on the archival materials, it is interesting how there were two initial plans relative to Intramuros as a location, either to leave it indefinitely and settle elsewhere or to set the Intramuros reconstruction plans aside as a matter of prioritization. Nevertheless, all of the orders found reasons for their departure. The OFMs, Intramuros was deserted and the Ayala family offered land. The Capuchins, Intramuros was no longer populated and the Araneta family as previously donated land to which they needed to satisfy their requests. The Poor Clares, the land in Quezon City was exchanged for theirs in Intramuros. And the secular Franciscans, the Intramuros fraternity merged with Sampaloc, and the land value of the chapel's ruins was perceived to be low. So not only was Intramuros' social relevance blurred at the time, the public response to its existence narrowed its potential futures, which was arguably also reliant to the response of Intramuros' former religious orders. Habermas's notions of the public sphere essentially propose how public opinion has power, a social influence, and can affect change in greater social institutions, which in this case, in the case of his theory, was originally based on governance. From this political standpoint, both Table 2 and later Table 3 comparatively pronounce a reality versus policy response to the issue of Intramuros during the post-war years, that is, how public policy has reflected public construction of thought on the walled city and its social relevance, and how it also influenced Catholicism. What is further interesting is how Table 2, slide earlier, and Table 3 are byproducts of the conditions of Intramuros' immediate post-war years, from 1945 to 1951. The Franciscan family characterized Intramuros as deserted, unpopulated, unwanted, and devalued compared to other sites at the time, be they outside the city's capital. They reflected rather than deflected the public's response to the role of Intramuros in such a practical time, such as RA 1607. Therefore, the establishment of their churches in such an unpopulated area was perceived to be counterproductive to their mission of Salus Animarum, that is to go where they are needed. This does not mean, however, that the Franciscan family had never thought of returning to Intramuros. According to the Reseña Historica of the Capuchins, both San Francisco Church and Lourdes Church were planned to be reconstructed as early as 1946, but eventually the OFM and the OFM Capuchins had plans to settle elsewhere. Such plans were temporarily halted because of the economic challenges which met the Franciscan family, who were by then refugees to closest Franciscan institutions, such as Santa Ana Convent, Santa Teresita Convent, St. Anthony's Girls Institution. The Operas Pias, the War Damage Commission reparation funds and sold assets were key financial sources to the re-establishment of their institutions. Moreover, it is fascinating how the exercise of collective solidarity came through the donations of various individuals and institutions, both local and international, and whether cash or in kind. And in this dimension of donations, their narratives tell how the Franciscan family mobilized popular piety to achieve their goal of settling outside Intramuros. The OFM channeled the founding of the Santuario de San Antonio and the VOT de Sampaloc through the devotion to Saint Anthony. The Capuchins had made the construction of Lourdes Church possible to the multitude of devotees, particularly those from the Archconfraternity. Important to note here is how these religious rituals and elements, how these religious rituals and elements have been so ingrained in the lived practice of Catholicism that many people stood out to help. And so in the context of this paper, the continuity of these Intramuros institutions also come as a matter of enriched life and resilience for both Intramuros and the Franciscan family. Figuratively, the diaspora period expanded Intramuros in such a way that its relevance is no longer merely geographical but also now of legacy. Lastly, these narratives, which are hidden in its former residents, help us understand why is the contemporary Intramuros what it is today. And so, thus, the post-war history of Intramuros provides a foundational context for contemporary Intramuros studies. That would be all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now head